Hi, everyone. We're going to get started here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Tonight's sponsors, kind of the usual. We have O'Reilly with the 2 books. Was 3, but one's gone. Help Yourself, the food, beverages, the buildings, CBS Interactive, specifically GameSpot.com. What are you holding up there? Oh, yeah, raffle tickets for the books. We have Joe Stump here, founder from SimpleGeo. He's going to talk to us about geolocation. What was I going to say? On October 5th, there is a web performance meetup here about CSS optimization and performance for the front end. A lot of us, I think, focus on how fast they can get the time to first byte, but sub-second response time there doesn't mean diddly if it takes you 10 seconds to load the whole page. If anyone has any announcements, feel free to stand up and make them. Kind of keep them short, 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started with Joe. Gadget has a T-shirt for us to raffle off as well, and looks like they're about to make an announcement. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe Stump from SimpleGeo.
Can everybody hear me all right? Yes? Okay, good. So before I get started, I got a couple announcements and things to say. When you're pitching jobs at startups, for us nerds, it's probably a good idea to mention whether you have venture backing and how much. Us engineers like our paychecks. And the other thing, I know that this is a PHP meetup, but if there are people interested in Rails jobs or iOS jobs, let me know. I have like a half dozen companies that are all looking for people in those areas. So the talk that I'm going to give tonight is a lot more kind of philosophical and kind of looking ahead where things are going with location, rather than in-depth technical details of everything that might be involved with location. Before I get started on this, though, I want to go over a couple terms that a lot of developers probably haven't heard of. I started a company called SimpleGeo with Matt Galligan a little over a year ago, and we started out as a location-based gaming company. And what we quickly realized is a lot of the tools and infrastructure and plumbing that we needed in order to build something like that just simply didn't exist. I had a guy come up to me, I don't remember where he's at, but came up to me, just beforehand, was like, I'm looking for a list of retailers, essentially. And that list is very difficult to find that isn't encumbered. One of the biggest problems that I think that's facing location right now is licensing. For instance, if you want to use Google's forward or reverse geocoder, I think they give you 25,000 calls a day, and you have to display the results of that on a Google map. And then one of the first calls I made, of course, when Matt was like, we need to get business listings for the US, I called up Navtech and was like, how much do business listings for the US cost? And they're like, well, that database is 275,000 a year, and then you have of course, you have a per call fee on top of that, and that's just the US only. So that's a big problem that's facing things. And then there's also a lot of new terminology for all of us to learn. First of all, there's a lot of different, more complex data types than what we're used to working with. Geometric-based, polygon-based queries that a lot of us probably haven't done since we did our CS undergrad. There are reverse geocoders and forward geocoders. A reverse geocoder takes a point and converts it into an address. Forward geocoder takes an address and converts it to a lat long. There's PostGIS, GeoDjango, just a lot of tools out there that I think a lot of people aren't used to. So if I say something that you guys are like, I have no idea what the hell that term is, just raise your hand and I'll try to explain it. The first thing I wanted to talk about is, the kind of the old adage is that content is king. During the first .com boom, we decided to take all the dead tree content and put it online. Lo and behold, there wasn't a whole lot of data that we had created. I think Eric Schmidt recently said that all of mankind had created 2 or 5 exabytes of data in the history of mankind before the internet, and we're now creating 5 exabytes a day or a week or something ridiculous like that. And the point of that is that, for the most part, data production is following Moore's law. We're doubling the amount of data we produce every 18 months, which for guys like us and gals like us is an extremely, extremely scary thing, right? If you think about the amount of data that we were dealing with, I used to joke with Mariano when we worked before I left Dig, and used to joke about if you'd asked the Joe Simpson Marianos if they had needed a MySQL server that could handle more than 500 writes a second in 1999, we would have laughed at you. Like, why would we ever need that many writes a second? And one of the things that I think is really scary and exciting, obviously, about the proliferation of all these smartphones is there's a couple interesting facts, I think. First of all, we've inadvertently created one of the largest sensor networks on the planet. There are hundreds of millions of devices out there that all have a minimum of 6 sensors that can do all sorts of reading. Another interesting fact, I think, about mobile and why we should be excited about location of mobile is that all of these emerging markets that investors like to talk about, most of the people in these emerging markets, their main computer is their mobile phone. They don't have laptops. They don't have iPads. What they do have is they do have a cell phone and an amazing cell phone infrastructure. Best cell phone service I ever got was on a ferry between Koh Phangan and Koh Samui, Thailand. And if you know where that is, it is the middle of nowhere. So that's something that I really find interesting. And the more I thought about this problem, the more it really scared the shit out of me. Because I was like, well, what happens when we start tracking everywhere we go and everything we do in real time, right? It's a lot of data when you think about it. So as a simple exercise, I thought about, well, what if Facebook needed to track their 500 million active monthly users? And what if those Facebook users were only pinging home with latitude and longitude and a timestamp? That's it. 2 floating numbers and an integer, twice a minute. So we're not even talking about really actively keeping track of where they are. Facebook would need to store 37.2 gigabytes per minute, 1.6 petabytes a year. And to put that in dollars and cents, $128,000 a month in S3 costs. So when we first did UGC, we thought that was like an amazing amount of information and a big information glut. We haven't seen anything. We're bringing billions of devices online over the next couple of years, and people are going to want to interact on the go with each other in real time. So that's why I like to give a little shout out. People, really wonder, like, why was it so hard to scale Twitter? That's part of the reason why it was so hard. And some thoughts when you're thinking about all of this data. And I think that, what's interesting about this data production that we're going through is as the production of data increases, its inherent value decreases. Simple laws of supply and demand affect data just the same way that they affect everyday normal goods. The more data that you have, the less it's worth, which is why you're seeing currently, I think one of the areas that interests me the most in location in particular is the increased commoditization of business listings and point of interest databases. Whereas a guy like me 12 months ago would have called Navtech and been told that it's going to cost $275,000 for a point of interest database, people can now very quickly plug into Google Places, Facebook Places, Foursquare, Gowalla, etc., which I think is really interesting. So my assertion as we move into this like location-based mobile reality that is definitely coming is that it's no longer content that's king, it's context that's king. If you have so much data that it's literally worth nothing on the open market, how are we going to make money? And the way that we're going to make money is by extracting valuable metadata from that. And if you're Twitter, controlling the flows of that data is also interesting. So the reason that I like context so much and think location is such a great example of it is that when we first started doing user-generated content online, one of the easiest ways for us to make that data more meaningful and interesting to people was to layer the social graph on top of it. That was a very useful piece of context for everybody, right? Because I don't really give a crap that half the people in this room just uploaded a photo to Flickr, but I do very much care about the fact that my mom did, right? So that social graph was a very important contextual element as we started producing more data. When we move into the mobile world, I think what's going to become even more important is location, right? I don't really give a crap that my friend checked into a pub in London, but I do care that he checked into a bar, a half a block down the street. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. Apple sold, this is an old stat, 50 million iPhones. That's probably a couple 100 million now or more. Each of the 3GSs has 6 sensors. The iPhone 4, I think, has 9 now. And that's only become, we're only going to add more and more sensors as we go on down the line. I can imagine thermostats probably going to be coming next, various other radio transmitters, etc. So just to give a slight idea, I don't know if anybody saw this, last year for South by Southwest, we collected all of the location-based data we could get our grubby little hands on, and we created this little short visualization, which is essentially all of the traffic, check-ins, well, you can see all the stuff here that we're keeping track of, in real time as the map fades in and out. You can notice that there's some interesting patterns that develop. In the morning, you can see a lot of the commuters moving in and out on the major freeway along this line here. You can obviously see this is the conference center where most of the activity was happening at. You can see actually later at night the activity moves away from the conference center more towards downtown. This is 6th Street roughly up here. And then you can see like there's a clock right here. So as it hits, kind of 4 in the morning, everything dies off. And then right around 6 in the morning, everybody's getting up and heading to work. And again, you see the major freeways light up. So I think I'm really excited about this. The one problem that I have with it is this is really fucking creepy, right? Especially when you think about, I just recently ran into a guy that I met at a conference earlier this year who was the guy that caught the MIT hackers. He was the guy, remember the MIT hackers that went to Vegas and took them for 20 million bucks or whatever? He was the guy that caught them, and he had started a company in 1984 whose sole job was to collapse identities. And so what that means is essentially if you're the type of person that was going out and kiting checks under false identities or, for instance, counting cards at a Vegas casino under false identities, he was the guy that would go out and figure out that these 3 identities were in fact this shyster over here. And he put up this slide at this conference that we were at, and he had all of this personally identifiable information, addresses, date of birth, passport numbers, etc. And he said that his algorithm actually didn't use that very much at all, and that the two pieces of information that were most critical to figuring out who a person was where and when over time. So just to give you an idea, for instance, it would take almost no effort for the cell phone companies, because they have every single phone call and every single text message that you send geotagged, for them to be able to, with very little effort, conflate that with your geotag tweets and your geotag Flickr photos, because over time you're going to expose yourself as essentially being that person, because Sense Networks is doing a lot of this stuff, which is, again, a little creepy. So some of the things that, kind of where you go from here that you need to be thinking about, like I said, the where I am is very important. The when I am is also very important. I think that we need to start thinking as time. When you think about location, you think of the three axes, X, Y, and Z. Time, really, it's important for that to be a first-class citizen, I think, as we think about location and we start programming tools around that. And the reason that I think that is because the value of an object's location decreases over time. Again, I don't care. I don't care that my buddy checked into that bar a week ago. I care that he checked into it now. I talked about this earlier. Value of an object's location decreases over time. I'm going pretty fast. Does anybody have any questions so far?
What about speed?
What's that?
What about speed?
What about speed?
Yeah.
So speed is a derivative of those four things, right? If you have a series of points over space and time, that's how you can evaluate and get speed. So speed and I think another one that you might think about maybe is possibly where you're pointing in direction, like out of the 360. But speed is something you can derive if you have enough points. So if you check in here and then you walk a little ways and you check in again, or you have a background app going on, like that's something that you can derive pretty quickly from those, especially if you have time. Any other questions before I keep plowing along? I'm really blasting through this pretty quickly, so.
This is fun.
Oh, I'm glad that it's fun. So of course, like one of the things, it's interesting. I mentioned I founded a company a year ago, and if any of the nerds in the room want to ask another nerd about what it was like to raise money and work with venture capitalists and angels, first of all, before I ever answer any of those questions, are there any VCs or angels in the room? Okay. One of the most interesting things for me was that I had to break out of the shell of essentially just my entire life for the last 12 years has been code and leading technology decisions and just tech, code. And it's been interesting to me to figure out business models. How are we going to make money? How do businesses scale? How do you extract value from the tech that you're building? It's very easy for us to put ourselves into a bubble, but at the end of the day, like we have to make money to sustain ourselves, right? So I want to talk a little bit about, as I see it, we've talked with a lot of people that want to work in location and some of the areas that I think are interesting around how to make money. So, how do we extract value from location services? I love that slide, by the way. It's one of my favorites. I don't remember exactly where I got this number. I read it somewhere online, but 9.2 billion euros by 2012. I think a couple other numbers have come out since I put these slides together. That's more along the lines of 15, 20 billion. I don't honestly know if that's going to be the case, but has anybody here? Everybody's here, I'm sure, heard of Groupon, right? Like, do you guys actually know how that business model works? It's so retardedly simple, and they're literally just like, I'm convinced they just have gnomes printing money in the basement. So clearly there are efficient business models to be had. I think that there's going to be some great ways to make money in the mobile payment space. I don't think that that's settled by any means. And what's nice about actually transacting from the mobile phone is that there's actually a considerable amount of infrastructure already there to do things like, charging. Basically, they do this all the time in Europe, where you can walk up to a place and say, oh, I need to pay you $10, and you can pay it just with your phone in a transaction. It gets charged to your cell phone. In fact, my understanding of a lot of cell phone contracts there is they actually work like credit cards, where you can get $500 worth of credit on your phone. one of the areas that I think at this point is mostly tapped is what's physically nearby and how you can possibly monetize that. Foursquare and the Goals of the world are obviously working very quickly on the who's nearby portion of all of this. Facebook's entry into places is obviously touching on this as well. I've been a little interested to see that Google has gone full boat after mobile. Most of the strategy that you see them rolling out these days, Android, Places, Latitude, the major initiatives that they're pushing are all focused solely on LBS and mobile for the most part, which I think is really telling. One thing that I don't think has been tapped into too much is what's virtually nearby. Zynga has proved without a shadow of a doubt that people are willing to pay for nothing. And it's amazing. It's another company that has gnomes printing money in the basement. I've heard that they're supposed to clear, I think they publicly have said over 850 million this year. They might clear $1 billion. It's insane. And what I find really fascinating about this is I've always been really interested in economics. And what I find really fascinating about virtual currency and virtual goods is that you can artificially regulate the market. Artificially regulate the market. You have no raw materials, so you have nothing restricting supply whatsoever other than a mass insert statement for the most part. And yet you can physically restrict the supply and therefore increase demand on virtual goods just by changing a database record. I find it fascinating. So what's virtually nearby, I think, is an interesting play. I think there are a lot of interesting things that people could be doing with just something as simple as a kids game where kids can buy trinkets and leave them around the school for their friends and stuff. So I think that's something that's interesting. The one though that I think is really going to lead the way is gaming. Online video, I think for the most part, porn led the way on that. Payment gateways, again, porn led the way on that. Finally, porn is not going to lead something that we create in technology, and I think it's going to be gaming. Some of the interesting things that I think can be done with gaming, a most simple example is changing gaming mechanics based on where a person is. Just being able to change the way that your character reacts in an environment based on the weather where you're currently at. Example of that means your dragon character is less effective in Seattle than it is in Phoenix, for instance. So, there are a lot of people out there that, quite frankly, do a lot more drugs than I do that come up with gaming ideas that can probably go hog wild with that. And I think that it also leads to a much more visceral experience when you're actually playing the game in the real world against real people. I think that back in the day when you would play first-person shooters, it was always more interesting to play GoldenEye in college for me when I had 3 buddies sitting next to me on a couch than it was for me to play that over the internet. I'm really excited to see the first massive multiplayer online game based in the real world. I think eventually my mom's going to be playing really bizarre games in the real world, which scares me as well. And just a little bit of a backup on this. Again, these are slightly older numbers. Foursquare signs up 100,000 users every 10 days. They've done 22 million check-ins since inception. Has anybody heard of MyTown? Booyah? 3 people? 4 people? Okay. MyTown signs up 100,000 users a day. They do 25 million check-ins a day, and they average, I can't get over this stat, 65 minutes per day of engagement. 65 minutes. I can't even imagine how many websites or things in total would kill for that kind of engagement number. That seems just totally ridiculous to me. So a couple other things. My big problem I think with location is we're in a rut right now. I think everybody's so focused on check-ins and badges and stuff like that I just don't find that interesting long term. That's not a long-term viable market. It's a long-term viable business for probably 1, maybe 2 people, most likely Foursquare, maybe Facebook. But we need to move past that and start working on more interesting things. So that's a lot of ums, and that's all I had to say on that. Does anybody have any questions? You and then you.
You talked a lot about kind of data and how much data is produced. What about data that doesn't have explicit geospatial identity? Is there any work on kind of intelligently parsing or intelligently finding the semantics of
Yeah, there's a couple of companies that are working on this now. Nokia just bought a company called Metacarta that did essentially that, where you would hand it a blob of text and it would use NLP to figure out what the locations that you were talking about. Fwix is doing that as well. So there are people that are doing it, and there is technology being built around that. So and then I think you bring up a good point with the implicit geocode, because there's a lot of data out there that a lot of people don't think is geocoded. Point of sales data at Best Buys, I mean, it's inherently geocoded, right? You know where the store is. And I think that people will catch on to that pretty quickly. I don't think that the implicit data is solely NLP based in free text, but yeah, there is a lot of it out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Location Labs, they've been doing deals with. I think they power Verizon's SDK, for instance. And they've been doing some deals around geofencing. The the big problems is that, like, most of us up to this point have gotten our data from essentially the same places. I think one of the most frustrating things for me when I first got into this is that you quickly realize there's a few wizards behind the curtain and they control everything. So if you want good data on streets and POIs, Navtec and TeleAtlas are really the only ones you can go to. And the polygons and stuff like that on Location Labs, I think, is all powered by Maponics, which they're the ones that Maponics does polygons for zip codes, school districts, neighborhoods, and a couple other things. And again, they provide that data to Twitter, Location Labs. We just signed a deal with them, a few other people. So yeah, that's the big frustrating part, I think. I don't see, unless the community really starts to take that up as this is something that we need to rectify ourselves, it's going to continue to be a pain point, especially if we continue to reinvent that wheel.
Has there been any thought about analyzing the type of people who do submit geoinformation and those who don't? So, for example, on all my profiles, I have everything geocache off.
Mm-hmm.
Almost never check anything except for exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of social graph analysis around those who are willing to be wide open with their information?
You mean as in, have we tried to actively infer that you're actually there when you...
No, I was actually thinking more of
the differences in the graph?
Well, kind of almost, and I probably shouldn't use the word social graph so much as maybe kind of a personality analysis or a demographic analysis.
Right. I don't know. That would be an interesting thing. My gut would be that it's mostly people that are much younger than we are. Like, we're the elders of the internet generation, whether we like it or not. I think most of us in the room can probably remember what it was like before the internet. And now that there's a whole generation that's coming up that can't, it's the Facebook generation. I bet that's what I would put my money on. I don't know if anybody's done any significant research into that, though. I haven't heard anything.
Has anyone tried to take advantage of very practical location services to say pair the location of a person in the store with something they want? In other words, we just be able to walk in a Safeway and punch and say, I want yams.
Mm-hmm.
And just say, take to them yams.
I believe that Shopkick is one of the startups that's working on stuff like that. There's actually there are a lot of companies right now that are getting funded in that space. I think one of the things that's been interesting as SimpleGeo has just gone around and talked to companies and stuff, the big box retailers and the brick and mortars that have been so derided for so long during the internet years, they fucking get it. They get location, and as a result, there's a lot of companies that are getting funded in that area. Shopkick being one of them, but there are a couple others. Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about the usage differences between actual geolocation of you have the Latin long versus like Twitter does, it looks like the IP address. While you're after that, how you find different value in those two different methods?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Twitter actually uses the browser geographic lookup API, which will actually call into the this is a little bit more. There's actually kind of three ways to get a person's location across mobile and on the internet. One of them being AGPS or GPS, where you get an actual physical coordinate. The other one being more Wi-Fi triangulation, which is mostly powered by Skyhook. Although Google is now getting, I don't know, that's a whole other can of worms. So the Wi-Fi triangulation, the browser APIs for getting location, where you can actually, if you go to Twitter and Chrome, it'll actually slide down and say, this website would like your location. If you go to m.flickr.com on your phone, it'll say, this website would like to use your location. That will actually call out to those Wi-Fi triangulation APIs that are in the OS, which is another way. And then the third way, which is the least accurate out of all of them, is the Geoip technology that's been around forever. The AGPS is obviously very good. It's usually very accurate from 30 meters and below. The Wi-Fi triangulation is better than GPS indoors than it is outdoors, because of the AGPS obviously needs signals and whatnot. And then Geoip stinks. It's good down to about the city-state metropolitan area. But I was actually in our office in San Francisco, and I went to a site that did Geoip, and it thought I was in San Jose, California. So that one depends heavily on your data source and how often it's updated. I wouldn't expect it to obviously, expose exactly where the user's at.
So how does that kind of data usage standpoint, where just back to the Twitter example, it'll kind of try to find it, and then it'll give you the options of, well, are you specifically here, specifically there,
Yeah.
and so on. How well does that actually tie into somebody doing a location-specific checking? So kind of I'm telling you where I'm at versus you being able to find out.
I'm not sure I quite get the question.
General information stuff.
I think right now the way that
Well, I mean, yeah, you have the two types of check-ins. You have the I know exactly where you're at,
right.
and I'm telling you where I'm at. That may not be
Yeah.
accurate. So is there a way of dealing with this?
Yeah. So yeah.
Check somebody in down there at the Gold Club, and they're over here.
Yeah. Well, I think Yeah, I think right now it's there has to be some inherent trust, right? I mean, they could even fake, if they really wanted to, the actual core response of whatever is going on. I mean, you can always spoof that. So I think really as far as that goes, like I think the route that Twitter's going, where it enhances the experience but isn't something that's shoehorned and forced on someone, is probably the proper route to go. I don't know. Until, I mean, the technology, especially on Geoip, is years behind where it needs to be in order to be useful.
With enough data, you can identify outliers that are problems. So if you get a cluster of people that are reporting their about location here, but then there's 3 that are out here, chop off the outlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Like, I think as we move into location and we start getting all this information, big data becomes an extremely important problem to be solving. So, yes, you first, and then blue shirt in the back.
Okay, security. Say, for example, like I had an app on my phone called Bump, which does geolocation and theoretically swap money, and I got bumped by somebody I'd never met.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, part of monetizing this stuff would actually be able to get, like, transferring money or transferring information voluntarily. What kind of security stuff work with on that?
I haven't thought much about security. I have thought a lot about privacy. So SimpleGeo, all we do is convert coordinates and store location data, but and I'm no security expert. The privacy implications, though, are real and valid, right? There's been a lot of, the Please Rod Me website, where everybody could find who was not home currently, or who had checked out or checked into a location that wasn't their home. And I think much like social, when we introduced social features on websites, and people were remember when Facebook first released the feed, and people were livid that you could see the relationships being done and undone in real time, and people were getting fired over pictures that they were posting. So we're definitely entering what I would call growing pains and periods of adjustment. People are going to have to pretty quickly realize that they can't broadcast their exact location. I think Latitude has some great privacy settings where they can basically say, this group of people can see exactly where I am, this group of people can see the neighborhood that I'm in, but everybody else can only see what city and state I'm in, for instance. So. Great project. Does everybody here know what Ushahidi is? Ushahidi was a project created by Eric Bowles, I think, in Kenya when they were having all the unrest. To basically, all you had to do was text a message saying, just saw a police officer beating somebody or whatever, and they would use the geocode on the text message to aggregate all of this crisis information in real time. It's an open source application that you can go and download now. Anyway. Oh, you were just asking how Ushahidi worked?
Yeah, because I keep thinking
Yeah.
they're coming through
again. Yeah. I was in August. I went to South Africa, and it was really interesting to see technology used for social good for once, rather than uploading lolcats. Ushahidi is a great example where that actually it did a lot to offset the violence and problems that were happening in Kenya. I've talked to other companies that are this is another kind of interesting problem, is that if you have all these mobile phones out there, and most of them are emerging markets, you can think of really interesting new business models. One of them was I talked to a guy who's created an application where a farmer in rural Africa can text a simple SMS gateway and ask for the closest places that sell a specific seed that he's looking for. So he'll text that in, and again, third world problems that we don't think about. Rather than giving him driving directions, it gives him walking directions to wherever he needs to go. So yeah, a lot of interesting, great things happening, I think, in the emerging markets, second world kind of places. I just saw 3, so I'm going to go this way across. Yeah. 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 It's a really cool project. Mario, no problem.
What type of government involvement how have you seen government embrace LBS? And I see like a lot of opportunity for them to use it for like commute tracking, like congestion planning, that sort of thing, as well as for civil service delivery. Have you guys contacted by that? I mean, there's like government summits and stuff like tech summits. Is this coming up?
We have. The problem is the government's really only interested in location right now if it means they can blow something up more accurately. And they have access to all of, don't think for a second they don't have access to all of that call information and geotagged and stuff. So the problem is that government's interest in location is not altruistic in any means. They want to know where people are, they want to know where they're going, they want to know what they're doing. It's all nefarious stuff, so you're probably never going to hear about it, or they want to blow stuff up. Yeah, I know. We should all be shocked by that. And then I think there was one here, and then I'll go over. Okay.
Has anyone started to look towards, since we have all these fairly powerful phones floating around, moving from millions of clients to thousands of towers to a distributed network, using the phones as broadcast nodes?
I have no idea. I haven't heard of anybody doing that yet. The closest thing I know to people that are attempting to even think about creating that plumbing is the CouchDB guys are moving very much in that direction, because the one thing that CouchDB is very, very good at is syncing nodes that are offline for a long time and then all of a sudden magically reappear. And they've got it running on a phone now, so that you can basically have databases synced across mesh networks. But I don't know of anybody that are actually doing traditional kind of mesh networks.
What information does the gov really want from us?
Yeah.
I want you to talk about that. About what the government council that so that we have to lack more and more privacy about where we are.
I can't speak too much on the U.S. government because I'm not really, like I said, the only thing that we've heard from them is mostly around tracking people and trying to blow shit up. But Europe considers latitude and longitude to be personally identifiable information. And this is a real stickler because the EU, anything that is considered personally identifiable information, the EU requires that it be stored in an EU country and not leave the EU. So more than likely, Foursquare and GoWall are both breaking EU laws, because I would bet that they're not storing EU check-ins in the EU. And this becomes even more problematic in the EU with business listings. This is a problem that we just ran into. We were looking for European business listings, and the problem is a lot of European countries don't have the LLCs and incorporate, like they don't, it's very troublesome. They're not as litigious as the United States, so getting an LLC is a very costly and usually unnecessary endeavor. So in reality, most of the businesses, especially the mom and pop cafes and stuff, are all DBAs, doing business as. So the businesses, the business listings are actually people according to the EU, and therefore those business listing databases need to be stored on EU servers. So the EU is, I think, way ahead as far as privacy concerns around those bits of information, and I think the U.S. government they want it to stay open so that they can farm it, is my guess. Was there one over here? No? Okay, you and then you.
It's kind of interesting, though, that a lot of this innovation wouldn't happen in pods, right?
Yeah, probably not. But I mean, there are servers in the EU, so.
Yeah.
But
you have to be big, basically.
What's that?
You have to be bigger to, like, have a large server network.
Yeah.
Going back to privacy and security, as more people wisen up to the fact that everything is being tracked, and you have 9 sensors in your iPhone 4, they're more likely to turn that stuff on, especially scrutiny of privacy settings and whatnot. Whereas you mentioned before that the power of this data is in being able to get at it and mine that data. So what do you think is going to be the reason that people should keep this on? How are you going to combat people turning it off because they don't want their location known?
You've touched on a subject that is near and dear to my heart, which is that you're an engineer. Yeah. Have you like gone out amongst the others and talked to them? They are idiots. Like they have no idea. Like they can't plug in their USB printer and print a document, right? So there's no fucking way that they're going to be like, oh, this is how I turn off the gyroscope on the iPhone. They have no idea. Like, have you seen, like, this is something I talk about all the time, mostly around design, because us engineers like to think that we're ad hoc designers. Like, the number one search term on Yahoo is google.com, and the number one search term on Google is yahoo.com. They have no idea how to do that stuff. So, like, like 20, 30, 40 years from now, they might be able to, like, my mom, when she's 120, might be able to figure out how to, like, take a picture with her cell phone. But, like, that's, you know, that's the reality. Like, Facebook has leveraged that to the hilt. Right? People have no idea how to change privacy settings, and they don't even know the implications of that. So I don't think we have to combat it. They're, as he said, they're lazy, and I think far more of them just have no idea how to do it in the first place. Absolutely not. not the U.S. government. The EU will. The U.S. government won't because, again, they're relying on the same things we're relying on, so they can mine all that data themselves as well. I would be shocked if the U.S. government came out and said, you have to have default privacy settings on anything.
It seems to me that the natural response to, if you can't hide your location, you want to, and you actually want to be private, you should be able to fake your location in enough places that your location data node becomes a useless part of a big cloud.
I think the way it's currently set up would be pretty difficult, right? Because it depends on what the collection mechanism was and what was reporting. But if everybody's cell phone is tied to an EIN, and that's how they can track you. So they know down to the hardware level where that phone is. So you'd have to be able to replicate multiple EINs on the network for cell phones anyway. I mean, there might be other ways to spoof elsewhere.
Is there an app for that?
There should be.
So, I don't know if you remember Fire Eagle from Yahoo.
Uh-huh.
I think they're still.
I hired the lead developer.
Yeah.
I hired the lead developer.
Oh, cool. But I thought it was a good idea because it's a single place you check in and it sort of broadcasts out. So,
Yeah.
We're going far away from that now. So do you think it'll ever get to back to that level again where, there's so many apps, so many places to check in, you need a centralized database?
I think that we'll eventually get a centralized location database, and I think that we will get, and I think those might be two different things. A centralized check-in app and then a centralized POI database, I think, are two different things. Obviously, one could use the other. I think that's what Foursquare's trying to do. They're trying to own that presence layer. I think they're going to have trouble going up against Facebook, but I think that's where they'd like to be.
POI sounds like a very good idea for open source.
The what?
It sounds like a very good idea for open source.
The Open Place database? Yeah. I agree. In fact, there's a project out there called OpenStreetMaps, which is trying to do this. The problem is that, and they're currently trying to revise the license, but the license right now is a Creative Commons license that requires it's the one viral version of the CC license. I forget which one it is, the CC3, I think, or something like that. The share alike, I forget. Yeah, they're in the middle of switching licenses. They haven't yet though. So, and then there's all sorts of problems with OpenStreetMaps right now.
Kind of a more technical question. Can you talk a little bit about how you're addressing the data storage problems with gathering that much data in place to store and access it?
Sure. So at SimpleGeo, we have access to all of the location-based tweets and all of the Foursquare check-ins, all of the location tag, Flickr photos, etc. in real time. We use a combination. We use Cassandra to store the record data. We use Hadoop and HDFS to do munging on that, and we have developed a spatial database internally that allows us to create spatial indexes on distributed hash tables that we haven't released yet.
Can you talk more about SimpleGeo in general?
Sure. So SimpleGeo, we're trying to solve that problem of offering a lot of this basic plumbing. Getting the data has been really difficult in a lot of places. I think the two areas, like one of the problems, we're still fairly new on a lot of this, but we have a couple apps a couple things. The iPhone SDK is really solid. We have an augmented reality thing that you can drop in, where basically you feed in your point database into our cloud, and then we have a little augmented reality view that you can drop into your iPhone. It takes 8 minutes to add augmented reality to your app if you want. And another service that we have a whole bunch of things that are kind of asides at this point, but we have another one that we call Pushpin for now because Apple sent us a cease and desist. But what that allows you to do is essentially give us a latitude and longitude, and we tell you the geographic, cultural, and political boundaries that lives in. And based on that, we have some other things that allow you to do rudimentary geofencing, so you can do things as people transition from one neighborhood to another, stuff like that.
When we get data back, like Selma, right now I think we're in South Financial District or something.
Yeah, you could.
I think it returned South Financial.
Oh, it might. Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, that comes from a lot of different data providers. This is again one of the problems that we have. And then.
Are you working on with other developers to find the boundaries and adjust the boundaries?
So the place that we got the neighborhood maps from is a place called Facto Maps, which is actually basically a couple scientists one from Berkeley and another one from somewhere in Singapore, and it's a very academically religious kind of polygon set. So we haven't been actively working on that, but that's something. The data problem is very much something that we're focused on right now. And I'm hoping to be able to talk more about that in a couple months. So.
What kind of political boundary data do you provide? Because I'm working with political candidates and need to know election districts, and that's pretty.
I think that was one of the data sets. We have that data set, but because you can get it from Tigerline, but we haven't. I don't know if that's in there. I know census tracts are.
Census tract is one thing.
Yeah, voting districts is yeah. Voting districts are amazing too because a lot of them are like donuts and other crazy shit.
They're not provided by the census.
Yeah, we have that data, but I don't know if it's in Pushpin or not. You can email me, Joe at SimpleGeo, and I can follow up on it. Yeah, I saw you in the back there. I tell everybody in the crowd, if you can get me Polygon data, I will figure out a way to add it to the database. That's one of my number one goals right now. Well, I charge $4 million per query. I'm still waiting for that first query to come through, by the way. No, it's just a normal cloud model right now. Just we haven't announced pricing yet, but it'll be a very low price per query kind of thing. So, well, it'll probably be buckets, pennies per 1,000 queries or something like that. It'll be pretty low. And we already have a free plan. You get 1 million calls a month for free, so you can go fairly hog wild with it as it stands. Nice. I'm glad to hear that some developers are loving it. Because normally the ones that voice their frustrations are the ones that are like, this sucks. But yeah, it's the other thing I was going to mention in the SDK. I don't know if you guys have been using it, but our point tracking and history endpoints are pretty interesting. Where the way that SimpleGeo works in a nutshell is you can push a point into a bucket, essentially, very similar to S3. And what we'll do over time, if you keep updating that point, is we'll take the previous latitude and longitude timestamp and put it onto a breadcrumb so that you can track points over space and time. And that happens all automatically and whatnot. So
in building kind of a location-based service, are the kind of the kingpins of the location stack latitude and longitude or the map bottom? Or do you really want all the data you can get, like street name, address,
I think it depends on your app. That is the core. I mean, the latitude and longitude, you can get all of that other information from those two pieces of information. But what you convert, because the latitude and longitude, like computers don't know what those are. We don't know what those are. Jakarta doesn't know what those are. But it all depends on your use case. I really think. I've been ignoring you. I'm sorry.
Okay. So did they ask about the geometry guides that you support on your backend, like Polygon?
They didn't. So the Pushpin is Polygon only, and we're keeping that a finite data set for now, just known Polygon borders. We're going to be very quickly over the next probably couple of weeks, we're going to be adding airports and parks and arenas. So, but polygons for now, we plan on offering Polygon storage and whatnot at I don't know. I'd have to ask one of the nerds.
In the backend, is it Cassandra in your own indexing system?
Yeah.
Is it JTS and GeoHash stuff?
No. GeoHashes. I'm glad somebody brought it up. Does everybody know what GeoHashes are? Everybody know? It's basically a way to create an interleaved hash of latitude and longitude. It's kind of it's a lossy encoding, and that's the big problem that we ran into with geocode GeoHashes is that it's lossy in that you lose precision when you encode and decode. And then the other problem was GeoHashes are essentially just a representation of a bounding box for the most part. And the problem with that is that if you have a location query, it usually comes in the form of here's my point and here's a radius, and I want to find shit in here. Since they're squares, you have two real options. One is to do a whole bunch of, make 35 squares that kind of look like a circle and do queries against that, or to do one big geohash. And the problem with doing 35 queries is you have, there's a lot of overhead and I/O in that. And then the other problem is in order to find a common geohash that covers the whole circle, you'd end up with a lot of dead space. So you're looking for stuff in here, and the first 50 records is actually way out here on the other side of the square. Yes. Yes. We've switched around a couple times, but yeah, we've explored the problem with the tree structures is doing those in a distributed hash table has been our biggest learning curve. So we started out doing, and I apologize that I can't get technical on this, and I'll bring Malone next time because he's the one coding it all. But we started out with distributed Z-curves, which is an implementation that's along those lines, and we've switched to something else that is far over my head. So, but what I can say is geohashes absolutely fell over, and it wasn't something that was a viable option. Yeah.
When you're talking at a PHP meetup about geolocation, do you find that you typically get this many questions? And as a follow-up to that, are they often as dumb as the one I'm asking?
Do I normally get that many questions, and are they? I don't think your question's dumb, and I think that we do get a lot of people are really interested in location. They're excited about it. It's an interesting new space, and to be quite frank, us internet kids don't know a lot about location. This is a very new frontier for us. What I find interesting is that most of us in the room, he said JTS. I bet very few people actually know what JTS is in the room, which is it's a library for Java for doing geospatial stuff. And there is a tens of $billion a year location-based industry that has been happily chugging along unbeknownst to the rest of us. So that's why I find it kind of funny that it's just really weird because there's this whole thing over here that we haven't known about that's mostly based in oil, mining, government, municipalities, and defense. And that's probably why we don't know much about it. But there is a lot of great technology out there. JTS is a great library if you're in Java. PostGIS and GeoDjango are both great tools. But what I find most interesting about that part of the ecosystem is there are largely three viable technical solutions for storing geometric data in a database. One of them is PostGIS, which is actually something that's duct taped onto the side of Postgres SQL. And I think a lot of us probably know how well Postgres scales, and MySQL for that matter. I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular. There's MySQL, or there's Oracle Spatial, which by definition is out of the question for most of us. And then there is a company called, has anybody heard of Esri, E-S-R-I? Oh, you used to work with them. Oh, well, there you go. I think their ArcGIS server powers hundreds, if not thousands, of municipalities around the world. And I've heard numbers, and you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard very poor performance numbers on as far as how much that can index and store. What's that? Oh, yes, another very cheap, easy to get database that runs on a stack that most of us don't use. Yeah, so this was a big problem, was that most of the GIS tools, which was a term that was invented by Jack Dangerman in 1969, were not made for real time. And this is a big pain point, is how do we meld location in real time and do anything meaningful, especially when you consider that the normal maths that we have been using to do a lot of our social and other things is relational algebra, and we're moving into geometric computations, which of course are a lot more difficult for our processors to figure out. So then you have people like Digital Globe, which is a large, they were the first people to get a permit to do image satellites, and their cloud is basically literally like one server, one row of Teslas. So I think as we move further into location, you're probably doing a lot of this already. We're going to be not asking how many cores your CPU has. We're going to be asking how many cores your GPU has. So it'll be interesting. It's a whole new world.
That was exactly the answer that I was expecting.
Oh, well, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Have the GIS support in Mongo? I knew we weren't going to get out of this without talking about Mongo. We have. Mongo is licensed under the AGPL, and the AGPL, I think, is one of the worst things to ever happen to the open source community. And I have a real problem with AGPL. I don't have a problem if you want to do that for your side project, that's fine. But I feel it's very disingenuous to the community to release a piece of software under that license because it really smacks of having your cake and eating it too. Philosophical reason I don't like MongoDB. Technical reasons I don't like MongoDB is the fact of how it writes the data, right? It's my understanding and everything I've read is it's buffered right so that if that shit crashes before it's paged to disk, hope you didn't really want that data. And when it comes to NoSQLs, and this isn't a MongoDB really slam in any way, but when it comes to kind of the whole NoSQL genre of storage engines, I think that each one tends to tackle the CAP theorem in a slightly different way. I think the Redises and Tokyo Cabinet and or I guess Tyrant is the actual server, right? And then Mongo are kind of in one crowd where they use the old memcache style of hashing, and if you want to scale out, I don't think that's viable for big data. It makes it really difficult to multi-home, and it makes it really difficult to do data migrations and load balancing and things like that. The other end of that spectrum are the ones that are more like Cassandra and Voldemort and HBase that do handle that very well. So if you're looking to just squeeze raw performance out of a single machine on a site that does 1 million or 2 million uniques a month, I think the Mongos and Redises are great solutions. If you have terabytes of data coming in a day and you need to be able to manage and move that around, especially if you're multi-homed, I think that those solutions are going to be pretty poor compared to some of the other ones. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks for having me, guys.
So we have our raffle too. Did everybody get a raffle ticket? Anybody not? All right. Cool. You want to pull one?
Oh.
All right. 333. Euler. 333. All right. Here, grab another one. 349. Anyone? 349? All right, there we go. So you got which one is that? PHP, the good parts from O'Reilly, and you have Twitter API. Yeah. And then one more for the gadget T-shirt. 303. 303? Oh, failure. 365. Yay! All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. If you have any suggestions for our next talk, send it to Mariano or I. And if you have an actual speaker that would speak to, that's always a good thing. So feel free to hang out if you want. Otherwise, I think we tend to head down to a bar somewhere nearby and have some beers and stuff afterwards too.